Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and hello everyone. My name is Islah Muazzin bin Ismail and I am truly excited to be having this extended discussion today with my partner Muhammad Nafan bin Muhammad Nazir. When we first began planning for this dialogue, we realized that the topic factor contributing to reading achievement isn't just academic, but something that shapes the future of learners, societies, and even national development. Today, we'll be exploring this very important question in depth. What factor contribute most to reading achievement? And perhaps more importantly, do these factors carry equal weight in every context? Or do they change depending on the circumstances? Now, can you please introduce yourself to everyone?
Thank you, Islam. Hi everyone. I am Muhammad Naufal bin Muhammad Nazir and I am equally thrilled to be part of the conversation. Like Islam mentioned, we are drawing inspiration from Snow, who argue that reading achievement is never the result of a single factor. Instead, it is influenced by a constellation of variables such as self-discipline, parental support, teacher expertise, and peer influence. But what I found interesting in Snow's work is the emphasis on variation. Depending on the learner background and learning context, one factor may weigh more heavily than others. For instance, in well-resourced families, parental support may dominate, while in disadvantageous settings, discipline or teacher expertise may become more decisive.
Exactly, Naufal. That is why we didn't want to simply list these four factors. Our goal in this extended discussion is to analyze, compare, and reflect on how each of these elements play a role, and then challenge each other to consider whether one factor might be the ultimate driver of reading success, or, as is known in, whether importance actually shift depending on the cultural, social, and economic circumstances.
And to keep this lively and meaningful, we're not just going to agree with each other the whole time. We have promised each other that we will balance our speaking time, ask questions, and push each other ideas. That way, we both learn from the debate rather than simply reciting points. Hopefully, we will find our dialogue not only informative but also engaging, almost like being part of a classroom debate.
Great! Let's get started then. Before we dive into which factor matter most, let's first clarify what we meant by reading achievement. Too often, it's misunderstood or reduced to test score, so we need to establish our foundation. When we say reading achievement, many people immediately imagine an examination result or standardized test score. But to me, that is a very narrow definition. Reading achievement is much broader. It encompasses fluency, comprehension, critical analysis, vocabulary, expansion, and even the ability to transfer reading skills into other subjects such as science, history, and mathematics. For example, a student who can decode words quickly but fail to grasp meaning or connect ideas isn't truly achieving in reading. Real achievement involves being able to apply reading to learn, think critically, and engage with the world.
I agree fully, but let me add another dimension. Reading achievement is also about attitudes and emotional engagement with reading. A student might have the technical skills to decode and comprehend, but if they dislike reading, if they view it as a chore or punishment, so they may never become lifelong learners. In my opinion, achievement should not just be measured by academic success, but also by cultivating a positive relationship with reading. A student who loves reading will naturally continue to grow, even outside of formal education. That love often translates into better performance later, whether in school, university, or the workplace.
Yes, that is important. OECD PISA Program for International Student Assessment reports, for instance, constantly show that reading engagement is a strong predictor of achievement. As technical reading skill OECD 2019, that means motivation and enjoyment are not secondary, they are central. A child who reads voluntarily for fun tend to outperform peers who only read because they are forced to. And beyond that, motivated readers often branch out into diverse genres, which broaden their perspective.
Good point. And because of that, the four factors we're going to debate: discipline, parental support, teachers, and peers. Don't just affect academic outcomes, but also shape motivation. For example, a disciplined learner may set their own goals, while parents might spark early interest, teachers may introduce new genres, and peers can make reading socially meaningful. Each factor has both a cognitive and an emotional dimension. Shall we begin our first round, comparing self-discipline with parental support?
Absolutely. This first round will really set the tone for how we see internal versus external influence. Let's dive in. My position is clear. Self-discipline is the most important factor in reading achievement. Why? Because reading is a skill that develops with consistent, deliberate practice, no matter how many books are available or how talented the teacher may be. If the student doesn't discipline themselves to read regularly, progress will be minimal. Discipline ensures sustainability. It is what transforms occasional practice into a lifelong habit. Let me give you an example now. Imagine a learner who set a personal rule to read 20 pages a day, no matter how busy they are. Over weeks, that daily habit compounds, leading to significant vocabulary growth, improved fluency, and stronger comprehension skills. Guthrie and Greenfield 2000 found in the engagement model of reading that self-regulation combined with motivation predicts reading growth more reliably than external encouragement. This shows that discipline isn't just a nice addition, it's the foundation of progress.
I respect the argument, but I see it differently. Most children, especially in their early years, don't just develop discipline. Out of nowhere, they need a seed to be planted, and parental support often provides that seed. Parents are the first literacy educators. They expose children to books through bedtime stories, library visits, book purchase, or even simply having a reading-friendly environment at home. Research by Snatcher and Lee Fairwell 2002 demonstrate that parental involvement in early literacy, whether through shared reading or teaching the letters and sounds, it strongly predicts later reading success. Without that early input, discipline may never have a change to develop. Think about toddlers. They don't decide to sit down and read on their own. It is usually a parent who models and scaffolds the habit first.
My position is clear. self-discipline is the single most important factor in reading achievement. Reading, unlike speaking, doesn't come naturally. It must be practiced deliberately and consistently. Even if parents provide a bookshelf full of books or teacher assign wonderful tasks, unless the learner takes responsibility and develops the discipline to sit down and engage with those words regularly, progress will be shallow. Discipline transforms occasional exposure into a sustainable habit. It's the difference between a child who reads one book during the holiday and a child who reads every week of the year. For instance, think about a student who set a personal rule. I will read 20 pages a day, no matter how busy I am. At first, it feels forced, but after weeks and months, that daily rhythm compounds. Their vocabulary expands, comprehension deepens, and fluency increases. Gantry and Griffith 2000 highlighted that self-regulation paired with motivation is one of the strongest predictors of reading growth. Let me share an example. In my secondary school, I have a classmate named Farhan. His parents were extremely busy. His father drove lorries and his mother worked long night shifts. They had no time to sit and read with him, and their home had very few books. But Farhan created his own routine. Every night before sleeping, he forced himself to read at least one short story. At first, it was a simple story, but soon he moved on to novels. Within a year, he had developed such a rich vocabulary that he started outperforming students from more privileged households. To me, that shows discipline and can sometimes compensate for lack of parental support.
I admire Farhan's story, but I must disagree with your conclusion. Yes, self-discipline is powerful, but where does it come from? In most cases, it doesn't emerge in a vacuum. Parental support is the foundation that plants the seed. Parents are the first role model for literacy. Before a child even enters school, it is usually the parents who introduce books, who tell stories at bedtime, who take them to libraries or bookstores. Without this early exposure, many children may not even see reading as something meaningful. The evidence is strong. Seneschal and Lee Barrow, 2002, found the parental involvement in early literacy activities such as shared storybook reading directly predicts later reading success. Similarly, Hart and Risley, 1995, discovered that children from supportive homes hear millions more words by the age of 3 compared to those from less supportive environments. This massive word gap directly influences vocabulary development, comprehension, and eventually academic performance. I will give you an international example. Finland. In Finland, it is common for parents to read aloud to children daily. Even before preschool, the Finnish Ministry of Education has linked this cultural habit to Finland's consistently high ranking in PISA or PISA reading literacy. So while discipline is valuable later, without strong parental support in the beginning, most children may never even develop the interest or skills necessary to discipline themselves.
I don't deny that parents play a role, but let's not overstate it. What about children whose parents are illiterate or too busy to read with them? Are we saying those children are doomed? I don't think so. Many such children succeed precisely because they cultivate their own discipline. They borrow books from school libraries. They watch subtitle film to expand vocabulary. They read comic as an entry point. In fact, some of the most disciplined readers I have met were those whose parents couldn't help them academically. Their discipline became their survival tool.
Those stories exist, yes, but they the exception, not the rule. For the majority, parental involvement is still decisive. Even small actions matter. A parent who praises their child for finishing a book, or who asks simple questions like, "What was your favorite part?" This gesture builds motivation, and motivation is what leads to discipline. Without that early spark, many children never develop the self-control you are describing. Also, let's not forget Vygotsky's Socio-Cultural Theory, 1978, he argued that learning first occurs socially, then individually. Parents scaffold early literacy through shared activities. Only later does the child internalize those skills and become independent. So, discipline is important, but it is often an outcome of early parental scaffolding.
Alright, let me sharpen my point with another example. During my university internship, I taught at a rural school in PAKK. Many students there had parents who were farmers with limited formal education. They rarely helped their children with reading, yet some students, often the ones who had the grit to study independently, outshone their peers. One boy asked me to reread his science textbook again and again because he didn't have storybook. By the time exam came, he not only aced science but also displayed impressive reading comprehension in English. Despite limited home support, his discipline carried him forward.
That is inspiring. But let me contrast that with an example from an urban context. In Kuala Lumpur, I know families who take their children to bookstores like Popular or MPH every weekend. They attend storytelling sessions. They let children choose their own books, and they make reading a shared family activity. Unsurprisingly, these children develop strong reading habits early, long before discipline becomes a conscious choice. They associate books with comfort, joy, and family bonding. Look at the larger scale too. In Finland and also in Japan, where family reading cultures are strong, national achievement is high. That cannot be a coincidence. It shows that parental support builds a culture that eventually sustains itself.
Still, there is a danger of over-reliance on parents. What if the parent-child relationship is negative? A parent might force reading in a way that makes the child receptive. In such case, discipline, self-generated motivation, become the only path forward. Think of this and Ryan, self-determination theory, 1985. They distinguish between external motivation, like parental pressure, and intrinsic motivation, like self-discipline. External motivation may spark interest, but intrinsic motivation sustains it. Without discipline, even children from supportive households may stop reading once parental oversight disappears.
That's a good point. But parental support doesn't always mean pressure. It can mean gentle encouragement, modeling, or providing access to resources. Yes, discipline matters later, but without this early opportunity, how can children even discover the joy of reading? Parents lay the foundation, like introducing the alphabet, telling stories, asking questions. Without that foundation, discipline alone may be too weak, especially in the early years.
Let's consider Malaysia specifically. In rural areas where access to libraries is limited, discipline is often what makes the difference. A student will supportive parent but no access to book may still struggle if they lack discipline to creatively seek alternatives. Conversely, disciplined students sometimes copy passage from old newspapers, reread school materials, or trade comments with friends just to keep practicing. Their determination compensates for structural disadvantage.
Fair enough, but in urban areas where research are plentiful, parental involvement is often the deciding factor. Parents who take children to reading campaigns, storytelling events, or cultural festivals creates an environment where reading is normalized. In fact, a 2018 survey in Malaysia showed that children whose parents frequently visited bookstores with them had significantly higher reader engagement scores than those whose parents didn't. That's not just discipline, it is parental modeling and support.
So maybe we can say this. Discipline sustains the habit long term, but parental support often initiated. Parents may introduce reading through stories and praise, but once the child grows older, discipline is what ensures continuity. Without it, even children from a highly supportive family may abandon reading when distractions like social media appear.
I can agree to that. At the same time, I argue that without parental scaffolding in the early years, discipline may never had a chance to grow. Parents ignite the spark, and discipline keeps the fire burning. Both matters, but perhaps at different stage of development.
Consider again the case of Malaysia. In rural Pahang, discipline carried Azmi forward despite limited parental support. Meanwhile, in Kuala Lumpur, parental involvement gave children a strong head start. That shows context matter. Discipline might be the lifeline in disadvantaged setting, while parental support dominates in advantaged one.
Exactly, and that's why Snow 2020 argued that influence varies by background and context. No single factor always dominates, it depends on the circumstance.
Let me throw you a scenario. Now, imagine a child who has very supportive parents. They buy books, they read aloud, they encourage. But the child himself has absolutely no self-discipline. He refuses to read unless someone forces him. He complains, procrastinates, or pretends to read but doesn't engage. Do you think that child will ever achieve strong reading success?
Not fully, I will admit. Supportive parents can push for a while. But if the child resists discipline, achievement will plateau. However, good parents don't just give up, they adapt. They might use creative incentives, such as like linking screen time to reading time, or they model their behavior by reading themselves. They may even adjust book choice, moving from heavy text to lighter materials like comics or graphic novel to hook the child's interest. Over time, such strategies can nurture discipline gradually. So, while the process may be slow, parental support still remains the gateway.
Interesting. But now flip the scenario. Suppose a child has no parental support at all. Perhaps the parents are illiterate, too busy, or indifferent. But the child has strong discipline. Say, they decide to go to the school library every day after class, or borrow magazine from friends, or even reread old textbooks. That child, I will argue, will eventually succeed. It may take longer, but sheer effort can close the gap. Isn't that proof that discipline in some cases outweighs parental support?
Possibly, but let's be honest. These cases are rare. Research support this. Hoover, Dempsey, and Sandler 1997 found that parental involvement consistently boosts reading achievement across socio-economic groups. The probability of unsupported children reaching the same level as supported ones is low. Yes, a few exceptional students rise above, but systemically the absence of parental support tends to limit achievement for the majority. Discipline can compensate in individual cases, but as a general trend, parents remain decisive.
Fair enough, but context play a huge role. Snow 2020 emphasized that influence depends on circumstances. For example, in disadvantaged contexts where parents may not have literacy skills, discipline became a lifeline. In fact, some of the most inspiring literacy stories I've heard come from my mother. My mother, grandma actually, is cannot read, but my mother worked hard and now she became a teacher by her own self-discipline.
I don't disagree, but in contexts where parents do have the capacity to support, like urban settings, educate household, so the impact of the environment is undeniable. It accelerates reading growth beyond what discipline alone can achieve. Think of it as planting a tree. Discipline is the water that keeps it alive, but parental support is the soil that allows roots to take hold in the first place.
Let's draw this in Malaysia. In rural Sarawak, I come across stories of children who lack access to proper libraries or bookshops. Yet, some still succeeded by sheer discipline. They borrowed old storybooks from teachers, copied passages to memorize spelling, and even reread newspaper until the page tore. Their discipline compensated for the lack of both parental and structural support.
True, but in urban Kuala Lumpur, I've seen the opposite. Children whose parents take them to popular bookstore every weekend or sign them up for storytelling events at local libraries develop habits early on. They don't need to push themselves into discipline, but the family culture naturally nurtures it. A 2018 Malaysian National Reading Survey actually found that students who regularly visited bookstore with parents scored significantly higher in reading engagement than peers who didn't. That show the multiplier effect of parental involvement.
But Naval, doesn't that highlight an issue of equity? If parental support depends on socio-economic resources, then children from less advantaged families are at disadvantage from the start. That is why I argue discipline matters more. It gives children agency, even when circumstances are against them. Relying too much on parental involvement risks blaming families when really what we should do is encourage children to develop personal discipline regardless of background.
That's a fair concern, but I feel it precisely because of equality, we must emphasize parental involvement programs. Schools can train parents, even illiterate ones, to support reading in creative way by telling oral story, asking questions, or creating a quiet corner from homework. Parental support doesn't always mean reading Shakespeare aloud. It can mean showing interest and giving time. When families are empowered, the benefits ripple across children.
Good point. It reminds me of Bandura Social Learning Theory, 1977. Children imitate behavior they observe. If parents model reading, even just borrowing, even just browsing a newspaper, the child pick up that. But again, if the model is absent, the child must rely on internal discipline to find alternatives. That is why I think self-discipline is still the stronger predictor in adverse contexts.
True, but self-discipline often develops later, whereas parental influence shapes the earliest years. Brom van Brenner's Ecological System Theory 1979 also reminds us that the microsystem family is the closest and most immediate influence on a child. To ignore that would be to deny the most direct driver of early literacy.
So perhaps we can agree on this. In early childhood, parental support is foundational. But as children mature, discipline becomes more critical. A timeline, almost parental-like the spark, and discipline keeps it burning. Without the spark, there is no flame. But without discipline, the flame eventually dies out.
Yes, I like that framing. It is not a competition of either, or it is more like a relay race. Parents run the first lap, handling over the baton of reading habits. Discipline takes over in adolescence and adulthood. Snow 2020 was right. No single factor dominates in every context. They are important shifts across developmental stages. Alright, Islam, so far we have talked about parents and discipline. But let's widen the circle. Like, what's about teachers and peers? I think expertise is absolutely central to reading achievement. After all, children spend a large part of their day in classroom under the guidance of trained educators.
True, but don't underestimate peers. Children often learn just as much, if not more, from classmates. Peer encouragement, shared reading groups, and even friendly competition can spark motivation in ways a teacher alone cannot.
So let's start with teachers. The OECD 2019 report on reading literacy emphasized that teacher quality is the single strongest school-based factor in student achievement. Teachers don't just teach decoding skills, but they diagnose reading difficulties, different needs instruction, and inspire a love for text. An expert teacher knows when a child needs phonics practice, when they need vocabulary support, and when to simply encourage more free reading.
I agree, teachers are vital. But we must ask, do all teachers reach that level of expertise? In reality, teachers' quality varies. Some are excellent, some are average, some even disengaged. If a child is unlucky to land with an uninspired teacher, then peer influence may step in as the lifeline. Peers can model enthusiasm for reading, share story or introduce book outside the curriculum. Take the concept of peer reading circle, like the one we are doing now. Studies by Topping et al. 2017 show that peer-assisted learning strategies significantly improve reading fluency and comprehension. When students explain text to each other, they often use simpler, relatable language that teachers might overlook. For struggling readers, peers can make literacy less intimidating.
True, but peer influence cuts both ways. Positive peers motivate, but negative peers discourage. A child who hangs out with friends who mock reading as boring may abandon it, no matter how much the teacher tries. So peer impact is unpredictable. So it depends on group culture. Let me share an example. In my cousin's school, the English was incredibly skilled. She used dramatization, roleplay, and even digital storytelling apps to make reading come alive. Students who had little interest before suddenly became a wide reader because her expertise transformed the classroom environment. That's the power of a teacher.
And in contrast, I recall a group of students who formed a book club during recess. With minimal teacher involvement, they read mystery novel, swapped opinion, and even competed to see who could finish first. Their teacher facilitated space, but didn't drive the group. The peers themselves create a culture of reading. Sometimes peer-led initiatives feel more authentic because they are voluntary, not imposed. Think about it. Children see teachers as authority figure that can be motivating but also intimidating. Peers, on the other hand, are equals. They make reading feel fun and social rather than a test. In fact, Vygotsky's theory of the zone of proximal development, 1978, highlights that peers can act as a more capable others, scaffolding each other in learning.
Agreed, but authority has its value. Teachers can introduce structured methods that peers cannot. For instance, systematic phonics instruction or comprehension strategies like SQ3R, survey, question, read, recite, and review. Peers might encourage reading, but without pedagogical expertise, they can always address deeper struggles like dyslexia or limited vocabulary. In Malaysian classrooms, teacher expertise often determines reading outcomes in multilingual settings. For example, teaching English as a second language requires skilled strategies such as like code switching or scaffolding through mother tongue support. Peers may help, but without an expert teacher, language gaps remain wide.
That is valid, but peers also play a special role in multilingual contexts. A bilingual peers can act as a bridge, translating or explaining terms in a way the teacher might not manage in a large class, especially in rural schools with high student-teacher ratio. Peer support often fills gaps left by overworked teachers. Let me cite Wetzel 2010. Peers relationships significantly predict academic motivation and engagement. In her study, students who felt accepted by peers show higher resistance in reading tasks. This suggests that without peer encouragement, even strong teacher instruction may fail to translate into long-term engagement. And
I will counter with Dowling Hammond 2000. Teacher expertise not only boosts reading but also narrows achievement gaps across socioeconomic backgrounds. Peers may motivate, but teachers ensure equity through structure, differentiates instruction, otherwise peer lead learning risk, reinforcing inequalities because motivated students will thrive, but struggling ones may be left behind.
you know, when I reflect on my own childhood, I was inspired to read not only by my teacher, but also my classmates. We would exchange ghost story comment under the desk. Honestly, the thrill of those peer exchange made reading exciting. Teacher gave me tools, but peers gave me patience.
For me, it was the opposite. My English teacher in year 5 transformed my approach to reading. She introduced me to Charlotte's Web and taught us to visualize scenes like a movie. That shaped my reading comprehension skills permanently. My peers were supportive, but the spark came from the teacher's expertise.
So maybe the truth is this. Teachers provide the foundation of reading knowledge, while peers sustain the culture of reading. Teachers ignite the initial skill, and the peers fuel the enthusiasm to continue beyond the classroom.
Yes, that's balance matter. Teachers ensure literacy in structured knowledge, while peers normalize it as part of everyday life. Without teachers, children may lack essential tools. Without peers, they may lack motivation. Reading success thrives when both forces combine.
Exactly. It's like a bridge. Teacher lay down the structure, but peers are the ones who walk alongside you, making the journey less lonely. Both are indispensable.
And that mirrors the larger depth of our discussion. Reading achievement is never shaped by one factor alone. It is an ecosystem of discipline, parents, teachers, and peers working together at different moments in a child development. So, Islam, after debating discipline versus parental involvement and then teachers versus peers, I think we have reached a point where we must integrate all four. The original claim was that reading achievement is influenced by multiple factors with varying degrees of importance. Looking back, I see through it that each factor shines in different contexts.
Agreed. But it's not just about recognizing them individually. The real insight comes from understanding how they interact. It's not a linear formula that discipline plus parent plus teacher plus peer equal achievement. It's a dynamic interplay shifting as the child grows and depending on their environment. For example, parental involvement and teacher expertise are deeply connected. A teacher may assign reading homework, but if parents don't supervise or encourage it at home, the task may be left incomplete. On the other hand, highly supportive parents can compensate for weak teaching by providing extra resources. The factors don't operate in silos, they overlap and reinforce each other.
Exactly, and peers interact with both discipline and teachers. A child disciplined enough to attend extra reading session may sustain effort better if peers join in. Likewise, a teacher can leverage peer influence by organizing pair reading or group discussion. Each factor amplifies or diminishes the others. One thing we discover is that the importance of these factors shift over time. In early childhood, parental support and teacher expertise dominates because children are too young to regulate themselves fully. But as they grow older, self-discipline and peers influence take on greater weight. A 7-year-old might rely heavily on parents, while a 15-year-old needs discipline and friends to stay motivated.
That aligns with Erickson's stage of psychosocial development. In early years, children need trust and guidance from adults, parents, and teachers. Later, during adolescence, peer relations and personal identity become central. Reading habits reflect this shift. What begins as bedtime story with parents may evolve into book club chat with friends. But we must also reflect critically on context. In privileged families, parents can buy books, hire tutors, and ensure teacher quality through school choice. In poorer families, children may lack all this support. Their self-discipline becomes a survival skill, and peers may be the only accessible resource. This suggests that the weight of each factor isn't fixed but relative to circumstances.
Absolutely, that's why educational policies should avoid one-size-fits-all solution. In communities with low parental literacy, government can invest in parental training programs. In our craft schools, peer tutoring programs may compensate and across all contexts. Nurturing self-discipline should be a universal goal because it empowers children to take charge of their learning regardless of background. I also think it is dangerous to overemphasize one factor. If we tell parents, you alone determine your child's reading success, it creates guilt and pressure, especially for those struggling financially. If we stress discipline only, we may blame children unfairly for systematic disadvantages. And if we idealize teachers, we may overlook the reality of overworked educators. Balance is key.
Well said, Omfat. Overemphasized risk, creating what Paulo Freire in 1970 called the banking model of education, where responsibility is deposited onto a single agent, be it the parent, the teacher, or even the child, without acknowledging the relational communal nature of learning. Reading achievement, like education itself, is collective. So perhaps what we need is a holistic framework. Imagine a pyramid. At the base, we have teacher expertise and parental support, forming an early foundation. On the next level, peer encouragement, build a supportive social environment. At the top, self-discipline act as capstone, sustain lifelong learning. Without the base, the top fall. Without the top, the structure never complete.
I like that. It's also match the ecological model, the microsystem, parents, teachers, and peers surrounds the child, while the individual's own agency, discipline emerge within that system. Ultimately, the goal isn't to rank the factors, but to see them as an interdependent ecosystem.
So, after all this debate, I think we can agree, right, Nafa?
Yes,
No single factor win. Discipline, parent, teacher, and peers each matter in their own way. But what really drive reading success is their interaction across context and across time.
exactly. Reading achievement is less like a race with one winner and more like a symphony. Different instruments, different moments, but harmony only when they play together.
As we come to the end of this discussion, I want to revisit my core position. From the beginning, I argued that self-discipline is the ultimate factor in reading achievement. My reasoning was simple. No matter how strong parental support, teacher quality, or peer encouragement may be, at the end of the day, the learner must choose to read, to persist, and to practice consistently. Without discipline, external support risk fading away.
And I maintain a different stance. I place my emphasis on parental support as the most foundational factor. Children do not start with discipline ready-made. They acquire it gradually, and in most cases, parents provide the soil in which discipline can grow. Parents introduce the first book, model reading habits, and set the emotional tone for learning. Without that, many children would never even begin the journey toward literacy.
Of course, throughout our debate, I come to recognize the strength of your judgment, Alpha. You reminded me that discipline rarely emerges out of nowhere. It is nurtured through scaffolding, through bedtime story, through encouragement, through parent modeling, a love of book. I cannot deny that.
And equally, I must admit that your point on discipline's long-term value is convincing. Parents may guide for a few years, but eventually, children must take charge of their own learning. At university, for example, professors and parents cannot monitor every page a student reads. It is self-discipline that carries the learner through this later stage.
Beyond our own two focal points, we also examine teacher expertise and peer influence. I argue strongly that teachers have unmatched power to diagnose difficulty and provide professional intervention. Without skilled teachers, many struggling readers will remain stuck.
True, and I emphasize peers, friends, create cultures of reading, sometimes more powerfully than any adult authority figure. Think of book club, viral reading challenge, or even the global Harry Potter craze. These examples show that reading spread socially, like fire pass from one torch to another.
Together, we saw how teacher provides structural scaffolding while peer provides social reinforcement. Neither replace the other. They complement each other. In fact, some of the best reading programs combine both guided reading led by teacher, followed by peer discussion or group project.
What stands out to me the most is that reading achievement is not a solo performance. It is more like a symphony orchestra. The parents lay down the rhythms, the steady beats, the teachers contribute the technical precision, ensuring each note is played correctly. The peers bring harmony and energy, creating a sense of community. And finally, self-discipline is the conductor, ensuring that all elements work together and continue long after the music begins.
That is a beautiful way to put it, Alpha. And like a symphony, if one instrument is missing, the performance can still go on, but it is in that richness. When all four are present, discipline, parent, teacher, peers, the result will be extraordinary. From a practical standpoint, this debate also has implications for education policy. Government should avoid placing responsibility on only one party. Instead, they should design programs that integrate all four. For instance, parental literacy workshop, teacher training program, peer mentoring system, and self-regulation strategy in the curriculum.
Exactly, and schools should partner with families and communities. Too often, parents assume teachers are solely responsible, while teachers expect parents to do more at home. Bringing this gap through communication and collaboration could maximize student success.
So, in conclusion, I still believe discipline is the ultimate factor because it sustains reading across a lifetime. A disciplined reader will continue learning even in the absence of support such as parent and teacher.
And I still hold that parental support is the foundation. Without it, discipline and other factors often struggle to emerge. Parents like the first part.
But
What we agree on is this: reading achievement is multidimensional. It is shaped by self-discipline,
by parental support
by teacher expertise.
and by peer influence,
None can be ignored.
and their important shift across time and context.
And Snow 2020 reminds us no single factor dominates universally. The balance depends on the learner's background and environment.
Thank you, Nafa, for this rich exchange. It's been long, sometimes even heated, but incredibly rewarding. I learned new perspective and gained a deeper appreciation for the complexity of reading achievement. I am sorry if you feel hurt somewhere.
Okay, no, but and thank you, Islam. I agree. It was a journey of learning for both of us. May our discussion inspire educators, parents, and students to see reading as not just a skill, but a collaborative, lifelong process.
Thank you all for listening. Assalamualaikum and goodbye.